All right, now we have a very viral exchange which took place between Cam Newton and what's this woman's name here?
Dr.
Is it
Bryant.
Dr. Joyce Bryant?
Mhm.
Cheyenne Bryant, I'm sorry. Where they basically started talking about family values, marriage, and family. And the part of this interview that went viral in particular was when Cam Newton expressed how he's averse to marriage but wants to continue to have a lot of kids. So, for anyone who does not know, Cam Newton is quite the procreator. I think the current count is 8 children by 3 different women. And he was put to task by this woman, Cheyenne Bryant, over what she believes is his selfish approach to raising children because she believes that the children would be at a deficit.
Mm.
And basically contending Cam's logic behind why he chooses to do what he does. In with respect to like avoiding nuclear families altogether, but still wanting to go for the idea of just being able to have more and more children. Uh, Cam Newton is cut from, I would say, the Nick Cannon cloth.
Yeah.
Nick Cannon is who Cam Newton reminds me of when it comes to this kind of thing. But this particular exchange went hella viral with people expressing their views on this. So this says Cam Newton's controversial marriage comments sparked viral discussion. Cam Newton discussed his feelings on marriage during a conversation with Dr. Cheyenne Bryant on his Funky Friday podcast, which has been going viral on social media. In doing so, he revealed that he has 8 children with 3 different women, but isn't opposed to having more. So I'm not going to read his quote because I'm going to end up playing the video anyway. So um, when the Shade Room shared Newton's comments on Instagram, users were highly critical of the former NFL quarterback. Call me crazy, but I'd rather get married than have 8 kids by 3 different people, one fan remarked. Another wrote, it's no men in the comments. That means she clocked it correctly. So a lot of people had a lot to say, but here were the viral portions of this exchange between Cheyenne Bryant and Cam Newton on having children and marriage and families and all of that good stuff.
A lot of people see my situation and not think that I'm not high function.
What situation?
Okay, so I'm not married. I have beautiful children.
How many?
8.
By how
8.
many women?
3. And this is the kicker. I want more.
By multiple women? What's the intent?
I
I'm
just
just saying,
want
or by
God
your
to bring
wife?
them. I just want God to bring them.
Oh, okay.
My desire to get married is lower than my fear of divorce. So, as you had said, Dr. Brian, you said it. I didn't say it. I will agree. I'm just taking my time.
You're not taking your time.
I am, though.
You're being very action-based. You're not taking your time.
I'm taking my time.
You're being very action-based. You have 8 kids with 3 different women.
Yes.
You are creating, procreating, and multiplying. That is not taking your time. You're being very selectively active. Okay? So you're creating, in disclaimer, the kids are innocent. They are beautiful and amazing. Anything I say has nothing to do with them babies. But you are proactively choosing where you want
And here's part 2.
with them babies. But you are proactively choosing where you want to be active at and where you want to take your time. You want to take your time in having a wife because of your own fears. But you will, and I say this with all respect and love, what I'm about to say next, okay, Cam? But you will selfishly create broken families, even if you're in their life and you're a proactive father, and I believe you're an amazing daddy. I can only imagine with just your presence and knowing you. But these families are still broken. Every child cannot have Papa in the house with them. So some child, if not all will end up with some kind of deficit without daddy being there. Now, you chose to do that. I'm not saying you sat there and woke up one morning and said, I want to be selfish today, so I'm going to go make a baby. Not saying that at all. But those are selfish acts at the expense of your fear. And yeah, that is a low functioning behavior to say that I'm going to build these houses and put kids and these beautiful women and kids in them, but I ain't going to create a home. And
All right, so she calls it a low functioning behavior. So a lot of people had a lot to say about that, and I didn't read too much into the comments, but from what I saw, it kind of seemed like it's split with people saying that they hear where Cam is coming from, but people also saying that Cam is the worst person in the history of human civilization.
Yeah,
So So what did you make of that exchange, and where Cam stands on that, and then Dr. Bryant's response to his approach to how he likes to do things?
Okay, so now watching this clip, I had to get more context, so I did a little digging. I've never heard of this woman. So after watching more of this and getting more context, okay, she is a single woman. She's not married. She doesn't have kids, and she counsels married people and tries to get them to come together. She word saladed her way into explaining why a single woman can help married people. I'm not saying that they can't, but she comes off real holier than thou with this stance that she knows more than all, and she used that to antagonize Cam Newton in this situation. Now, for Cam in his situation where he's saying, "Hey, yes, I do have 8 kids from 3 different baby mothers." Cam later on says that, "Hey, all 8 of those kids are living with me, so there's no division going on." So then she goes, "Well, are the women living there?" And then he says, "Well, no." Well, she says, "Well, the homes are still broken." I don't care for the term broken in this context, because the family in this context, although she wants to say that it's blended, she says blended family. I like the word family at the end of it, and I like blended. It's a different type of family structure than mono, but at the same time, it is a family structure and an understanding that Cam has with his baby mothers. So since Cam has an understanding with his baby mother, since the kids all live with him, and he's there mentally, financially, and emotionally supporting these children, I don't see why there's a problem if he wants to introduce more into this blended family. I think that there's more than one way to skin a cat in this context, and he's skinning it with boiling water. All right. Right. She might want to use a scalpel or something, but that's fine, woman. That's all on you. But Cam is still making this thing happen, and he seems to be keeping his family afloat. This same woman has a viral thing going out there with Nick Cannon, and she's attacking Nick Cannon using psychological tactics like reflection and other things to flip the script on anything Nick Cannon was saying to make it seem like he's insecure in his own manhood is why he got to come out here and slay all these women. I wish that was the truth, Miss Dr. Bryant. But I would say in both Cam Newton's context and in Nick Cannon's, but we'll stick with Cam. But for her to be targeting these gentlemen and using these slanderous terms, saying broken family, I feel as though it's unnecessarily inflammatory. Now, if anybody's watched any of my of our videos dealing with relationships and marriages and stuff like that, I have a pretty much open stance when it comes to how certain people want to live their lives. I don't think everybody is built for monogamy. Don't, especially with today's day and age, with so many influences going on, where people have a appetite for more than one person. And my solution to all of these broken families is to do what Cam and Nick Cannon are doing in a way where they're having these blended families and trying to make that work, having family get-togethers when there's 2 different or whatever, 3 different people or whatever, and they're just all making it work and everybody's all happy and it's a family still. Yeah, there's 3 different last names going on, but everybody is still working together and moving towards upward mobility. So I think that there's ways that somebody could have a situation like Cam Newton, especially in a position that he's in where he can financially support all these children and financially support these women, apparently. So if he can't afford these things, I don't feel like what he's doing is broken at all. But I think this is dangerous rhetoric coming from a woman who's saying that she's a doctor. And I think that what's going to end up happening with this, I felt like there was a levels of progression of what these 2 gentlemen were doing, Cam Newton and Nick Cannon, and to a certain extent, that they were being men. Yes, they're out here having all these children, but they're being family men with this. Much different than the context that we heard, when we were growing up, where all these guys were just rolling stones. So I would like to commend Cam from, at least aesthetically, from what I can see, that he is doing a good job trying to be the best father he can be. And why not have more if you can afford more? And I think that Miss Bryant here is a little bit too judgmental, and somebody that is a doctor should be able to be a lot more open with concepts of a man trying to be there for his children and be there for the children's mothers. So I don't agree with this woman. I think that she is dangerous and she's spewing dangerous rhetoric. But what are your thoughts, sir, on Mrs. Bryant, Dr. Bryant, that is, scolding Cam Newton, saying that he's a what? What's that? What's the term she
The
gave him?
low functioning
Low,
behavior.
low functioning behavior. What are your thoughts, sir?
I hear all of that. I hear where you're coming from. I think at times I think it's possible, not to defend her. I don't know her. But
Yeah.
I think at times it's possible that we may be giving people like Nick Cannon and Cam Newton too much credit.
Mm.
From the standpoint that we don't know that their motivations behind what they're doing has anything to do with anything other than them just wanting to have sex with as many women as possible. Like, I don't know Nick Cannon personally, and I don't know Cam Newton personally, but I do know that their social status and resources puts them in a unique position in which their family structure doesn't immediately disqualify them from being perceived as an ideal prospect for other women. Whereas a guy on the street who may have 8 children by 3 different women is going to be looked upon as an undesirable prospect by what I would consider a lot of women today. So I'm not necessarily saying that Bryant is right or wrong, but I think sometimes, I don't know what goes on in Cam Newton and Nick Cannon's head, but I think it's easy to optically be the family man who's trying to make it all work, and that's a commendable thing, as in you planted the seed, now handle your responsibilities with respect to what it's going to take to bring them up in a semi-stable environment. But the impetus for having all of these children is what exactly? To really be, one big polygamous family? Or do you really just have a big appetite for women and you don't care if you get any of them pregnant? Like, that could be one of the things, and we don't know because I'm not in Cam Newton's head, nor am I in Nick Cannon's head. I will say, nevertheless, at the end of the day, that taking care of your responsibilities, particularly financially, but also in terms of physical proximity, is something that you should do nevertheless. When it comes to this woman here, words like broken, that's strong language. Because if the kids are in an environment which allows them to be able to thrive, I can't really call that broken. Broken is broken, like you just don't have a chance.
Correct.
Broken is like you're coming up in an environment where there is a high statistical likelihood that you're going to end up in some kind of a system. Like that to me is broken. But if you're in an environment where you have the potential to be highly functioning, it's difficult for me to characterize that as broken. So I feel like her use of that word is a bit strong. But where I think she's coming from with using that word is, I think she is using Cam Newton as like a conduit to communicate this type of dynamic taking place in regular society with people who are not Cam Newton. Like, I would imagine Cam Newton having 8 children by 3 different women means something entirely different than Big Steve, down the street from you having 8 kids by 3 different women. That may indeed be a broken setup. So perhaps what she is trying to do is sort of correlate what Cam Newton is doing with what she sees more often than not throughout her practice, which is, from a statistical standpoint, what she is looking at more often than not when it comes to situations like that is indeed situations in which kids are being brought up in an environment that sets them up more for failure than success. Now, I don't know. I'm somewhat putting words in her mouth from that standpoint. But I
Mhm.
would imagine when she's not dealing with high caliber celebrities, millionaires, and
Mhm.
people who can afford to do these things, she's probably counseling people in regular everyday life who do not have the wherewithal from a mental, emotional, or financial standpoint to conduct themselves this way, but find themselves doing it anyway.
Mhm.
And now you have a situation where you have these individuals who are out here having all of these babies, and they don't have an ounce of a wherewithal in the world for how they are going to successfully manage these situations. So I think Cam Newton, and to a certain extent, Nick Cannon is one thing, but I think everyone else is another. And I think what she may be doing in this instance is operating from a position of confirmation bias because she's seeing how the majority of the world handles these types of setups and sort of conflating that with how Cam and Nick Cannon operate these kinds of setups, which admittedly isn't necessarily fair to Cam and Nick Cannon because, again, perhaps they can do it in a reasonable way. But I think most people cannot do it in a reasonable way. Most people who do this do it in a very dysfunctional, highly toxic scenario, in my opinion. Not everybody can afford it. Most people can't afford it. And not everyone has the mental and emotional acuity to be able to do it successfully. And the last thing that I'll say is when it comes to the children specifically, regardless of the intent of the parents or people like Cannon and Newton, the way that I look at it is what is optimal for the children. I think people like this Dr. Bryant woman look at it from the perspective of, in her eyes, what is most optimal for the children. And I think
Mhm.
what would be most optimal for children is being in an environment where mom or dad, whether it's the man or the woman, it doesn't matter which one, is present more often than not and is not being stretched too thin in terms of the bandwidth that they have available to allocate to however many children or wives or girlfriends or baby mothers they may have. I think in any given family structure, that is what's most optimal. That doesn't mean that children don't have the chance to thrive in situations that are not like that. It's just to suggest what kind of setup would be most optimal. And I don't think, in my opinion, a man with 8 children by 3 different women who is by default going to have to stretch himself across that situation. I don't think that that is more optimal for those individual children than a guy who may have less children or less baby mothers or wives or girlfriends to contend with in terms of being able to allocate the necessary bandwidth to those kids so that they are, to use her word, not operating at a deficit. So there's multiple angles to look at this from. I think one of the angles one can look at this from is what would be most optimal for the children. And I think another angle to look at it from is in everyday practice, more often than not, how do these types of setups play out on the ground floor, in the streets, with everyday people, with people not named Nick Cannon and Cam Newton? Um, Now, could she have done a better job of having some understanding and clarifying that the way that Newton's approach to this could indeed be more high functioning than what she may be accustomed to encountering? Perhaps. So I'll definitely grant you that. But I think that there's something to be said about what's going on with people who are doing this irresponsibly, and they're not named Cam Newton and Nick Cannon. They don't have the financial means to do it adequately, the emotional, the spiritual, or the mental means to do it adequately. Thereby, you do have children who are, in fact, growing up in environments where they are operating at a deficit. So maybe that's where she's coming from with this. But I do think that there are multiple angles to tackle it from. And the truth, like most of these topics that we cover, in all likelihood, lands somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fair. The one pushback that I would give is, at least in the context that, because you say you're not sure if these guys are just doing it for the cat or they're actually trying to raise families. Well, these guys can have sex with whoever they want. Cam has had sex with more than 3 women. All right, but he's had children with just 3. And if he was, and I would also argue, if he's not trying to be there for his kids, well, he wouldn't.
No,
And
I wouldn't argue that.
not that he wanted to be there with the kids. Let me rephrase that.
Okay.
If he was just having sex with these women, just like how guys in the streets are just having sex with these women, and whoop, I got her pregnant, and I don't care about responsibilities, those dudes just dip. And Cam would just be dipping and just playing child support. Same thing for Nick Cannon. But these people, they have agreements. And the reason why this to me is something that I think people should look more into is because, again, people are out here already doing it. So, and so I think that what these guys are doing, they have the capital to do it, but that's what it always required in history. And polygamy wasn't something that just went on because guys just wanted a whole bunch of vagina, as much as modern society would like to make that seem a thing. If you had one woman, trust me, sir, you know what I'm saying? Or sirs or ma'ams. All right. If you have one woman, that's already a tall enough task. I mean, you're not going to sit here and want 3 more wives unless it meant something and there was a reason behind it. So, and there was a reason behind why it was done predominantly in African cultures and stuff like that, because it served as a stabilizing force within our community. If the guy could afford it, he could have those many wives. And it wasn't because, oh yeah, so I can get all this cat. It's multifaceted and it serves many purposes. I'll give one example. So if there's a woman, let's say that this guy has 2 wives or 3 wives, and one of them's, with child. Okay. The father doesn't have time to be sitting there tending to her. He doesn't. Why doesn't he have time for that? Well, he's got to go out there and make the money. He's got to go out there and make the plays. So he's a busy person and he doesn't have time for the mental, emotional, and all of that stuff that goes on. So that's what the sister wives are there for. The sister wives are there to be the midwife, to be all these other things. So while she's nursing and doing all this stuff and she needs care and all this affection and all this stuff, that's what the other women are there for. But when that has been removed and then that's all on the guy's shoulder, that is a lot of responsibility. He's still got to go make the money. He's still got to go do all this other stuff. And now he's got to come home and do all the emotional support and all these other things. This is just one aspect of it. But there's many ways that when it comes to child rearing and other things, that polygamy served a purpose traditionally in history. But then you would have to look to see when monogamy came into play and what its purpose served. And I'm trying to tell you right now, human nature, we've all seen it on display right now. Everybody's cheating on everybody. Why? Because the structure that's set up right now, I think, is not a sustainable structure. It fits some people, not all. So that's like giving everybody one religion. That's like giving everybody one one type of food to eat. And all there's a kind of different types of palates out there, different personalities out there. So not everything's going to work for everybody else. So for her to be running around saying that it's a broken home because it doesn't fit the criteria of whatever she studied in her textbooks, then I would say that she would need to look a little bit deeper. I would also argue that she would need to be running around here getting married before she go around hollering that somebody got a broken home. And so, and to tie back into her childhood, because I was sitting there watching the stuff, and she was talking about her dope boy daddy, and her dad was a dope boy street dude, and how he wasn't, her and her mama, the mama and them, they didn't really get along or whatever, but he was still present. And his presence of teaching her this, the right from wrong, being like this, being a street dude, so she don't need to get a street dude, because she already, has one in her father, and all of this other dynamics and stuff like that. She was talking out of both sides of her mouth. She was giving Cam Newton praise for being there like her daddy was. But at the same time, she was saying that, oh yeah, but your kids are going to have to learn from your mistakes and be a better version of yourself. Duh. That's what everybody's, is here to do as a child, is to be a better version than their parents were. And then, the same thing goes on when you have kids. You want your children to have better life choices. But better life choices doesn't mean that his children or his male sons or his daughters won't find themselves in a romantic situation like that later. The whole thing is did you come out functional? This lady will holler that she came out functional, even though she came from a broken home. So how can you sit there and talk about his kids and say that they're going to come up in a weird way when they're growing up in an air quote broken home? So this lady was talking out of both sides of her mouth. She was giving hot takes and hot points. And when I'm sitting there and when people on the internet are going to get their hands on this stuff, I'm pretty sure, yeah, the women are going to say that she was eating it up. Of course, they would love to hear that. All right. But I would say that in this context, all right, I think this is a very nuanced conversation, and that monogamy is not the only way. I'm not some polygamous thing. I'm not some blah, blah, blah. I don't care what anybody does in their own house. But what I'm saying is the reason why polygamy is a 4-letter word to me is conspiratorial. And I think that if there were more polygamous households going on, society would be a better place. And so to sit here and say that monogamy is bad, no. I think marriage is a good thing. I think marriage keeps you out of trouble. It keeps you focused. It keeps you determined. And Cam is in a pseudo marriage. He doesn't have to file paperwork with the state in order to run a functional household with his 3 women. So I'm not going to sit here and agree with this woman on any context. I feel as though she needs to have a greater understanding of what she's talking about, because if anybody watched her talking, they would hear her double talk. So it's not that I'm some champion for Cam Newton or anything like that. I just appreciate what these gentlemen are doing aesthetically. I don't know what's going on in any houses, but at least from the outside looking in, they're financially taking care of their kids because they can't afford to. And that's the definition of polygamy. And I'm telling you right now, if Cam Newton run outside the house right now, everybody knows he's got 8 kids from 3 baby mamas. I bet he'll have candidate number 4 baby mama trying to have baby number 9. And they know everything about what he's got going on, and they're willing to sign up for it. So at that point, what's dysfunctional about that? So I'm not going to sit here and say that polygamy is a 4-letter word. I think that people need to broaden their horizons. And with all these divorce rates going on, maybe monogamy may not be for you. So, yeah, I don't agree with this woman. I think it's dangerous rhetoric. I think she needs to hit the drawing board and to be better, to be honest.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think the numbers bear that it's not working in either direction. I think I don't like. Obviously, people who have a more laissez-faire approach to raising families and having children who don't necessarily look into the monogamy setup. Um, they aren't calling it polygamy. Like, people don't put a word on it, but they do have multiple strings of DNA going in multiple directions with multiple partners. And I think the current manifestation of that, from what we can see statistically, is it's not functional. People aren't conducting it in a functional manner. And maybe one can argue that in an alternate universe, people can educate themselves on what polygamy actually means and do it the right way. But as currently constructed, most people who are having multiple partners and multiple children by different people are doing it in a dysfunctional, toxic manner. They're not approaching it responsibly or structurally. And I think for people now, her with the double talk is one thing. That's fine. But I think most people who would thumb their nose up at the idea of something like this making sense are people who are using case studies from real life individuals as their evidence to why it doesn't work. And I think most people who are doing it in this way are doing it in a way that is not sustainable. So there's a lack of sustainability going on both sides. People who are trying to have as many kids by as many different people as they want, and people who are trying to be monogamous and trying to force square pegs into round holes when they know that monogamy and that particular form of setup isn't for them either. And I think for those who are doing it in a toxic, dysfunctional way, where there's just multiple baby mamas and baby daddies and multiple kids and all of this kind of stuff, parents, particularly fathers, are being stretched thin. Some of them are absentee, and that doesn't lend itself to a functional environment where kids are being raised for success. And I think that it's reasonable for someone to surmise that more often than not, that's what's taking place with people on the ground level who are doing things the Cam Newton way. Again, I can't speak for Cam Newton because maybe he is doing this on purpose and handling it the way he wants to. And if it works and everybody's happy and the women don't feel no type of way about it, then who am I to say anything? I don't give a damn. But I don't think everybody's Cam Newton is the point. And I think most often when we see this happening with regular people not named Cam Newton, it isn't like this. It's far more dysfunctional. is far more toxic and it's far more dangerous with respect to a child's development. So I don't think it's unreasonable for one who looks at it that way to say what would be most optimal for the children. Now, of course, we're going to get into the weeds with this conversation because it's heavily nuanced. Now you're getting into matters of personal responsibility and doing the right thing based upon what would be right, in so much as how do you look at the world, and that's a rabbit hole that we don't have enough time to go down. But on the surface, I think that I think what you're saying has validity to it, but I think in practice today in 2024, most people don't do it that way. They're doing it in a way that is the opposite of functional, and I think that the kids are paying the greatest price for it.
And I would say that people are doing monogamy the wrong way. And
Yeah, I think it goes both ways.
right.
I think people who are doing that are trying to fit square pegs in round holes. So you need to conversation needs to be had. People need to be honest with who they are,
Mhm.
and you need to understand who you are and adjust your life accordingly and make those right kinds of decisions. Doing it either way when it doesn't fit you isn't the answer.
Right.
So I'm not trying to champion monogamy either. I'm not trying to champion the nuclear setup where it's man, woman, and even if things are toxic and dysfunctional, you're trying to force it to make it work for the sake of the kids because that screws up kids too. So I'm not saying that that's the way to do it either, but it's no right or wrong answer is my point. And if anyone wants to look at that way, the Cam Newton model as being suboptimal with respect to what can happen to kids
Mhm.
mentally and emotionally, I don't think that they're wrong because they probably have a lot of case studies of what's going on in that way to cite why it doesn't make sense. But you can also look at people who get married and are doing it the wrong way too. So it goes both ways.
Yeah.
But I do one place in which I will agree with you on is generally speaking, people don't have honest conversations with potential partners or even with themselves,
No.
and just embrace who they are and do things the way that they want to do it. If you still want to be in the streets, despite the fact that you have a longing or an urge to have children, and you need to listen to that voice and be honest with who you are. Because I think in either direction, you're doing a disservice to like people in general, but kids more specifically, when we continue to try to fit these square pegs into round holes in either direction.
Yeah, and I agree, man. And so I'm not saying this is for everybody. The reason why I guess defend Cam Newton and Nick Cannon is because the caveat here is they can afford it. So if you can afford it, do it. But if you can't afford to do it. And in American society, in order to be able to afford to have as many kids you want from as many women as you want, you're gonna have to have a bag. These guys got bags relatively than other people. So yeah, Pookie and Ray Ray down the street, they don't have the bag. So yeah, I'm not saying they should go do it. So I'm saying that you need to be able to financially support that. And so yeah, to each their own, man. But I just don't like that default monogamy is the answer. And I think that that's not the answer. It's not the default. I think everybody has their own defaults. And I think to be in either one of those contexts, you need to be a mature person and know who you are and be honest with yourself, like you mentioned. And that's not going on in American society because that's not even being promoted. So salacious sex and everything that you want and desire at your fingertips, microwave society, pornography on everything that you look at. I mean, you can go on TikTok and find something scandalous. So the whole premise is that everybody's out of their damn minds. And then and when you try to get those people to get in a relationship, you're going to get all the dysfunction that we're getting now. So for her to sit there and throw stones as if she don't live a dysfunctional life is my problem with her. Cam Newton's got a whole situation going, 8 kids, 3 different women. And I would say that he's pseudo married to them. And then this woman here, single, no kids, no nothing, well in her 30s, sitting there barking that he ain't got his life together. I would argue it's the other way around. So yeah, my thoughts, bro. That's how I feel about it.
No, yeah, no, I feel you. I feel you. I just, yeah, we don't know her dating history, but it is interesting. Yeah, that's funny. I hear all that because I would like to it would be interesting to know the kind of men that she's been
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I will say, at least she is not herself a single mom, because at least from a profile standpoint, she can stand on business in terms of what she preaches. But the holes in her relative arguments is something that one can contest if you chose to. So I also don't disagree with that as well. I think the crux of this whole thing isn't about whether it's a good idea to be having a lot of kids by different people or to be monogamous. In my opinion, that's not the crux of the conversation. In my opinion, the crux of the conversation is people being more principled and responsible with how they orient their lives.
Right.
Whether you choose to be a polygamous or a polyamorous person, or whether you choose to be a serial monogamous, you just need to be responsible with how you do things.
Correct.
And I think what's being encouraged to people these days is YOLO. Do whatever you want and don't care about the consequences. Whether you want to be a polygamous or a monogamous, it's just being force fed to people that there are no rules and you can just do whatever you want. That's really the problem. Because if you're a principled, responsible person, if you want to do the Cam Newton thing and do it responsibly, to me, that makes more sense than doing monogamy and you're fighting and fussing and arguing with your wife or your spouse every day, and the kids are exposed to that.
Exactly.
And now they're going to grow up dysfunctional as hell because they saw y'all fighting every day.
Exactly.
So obviously there's multiple ways to skin a cat, but to me, the problem with this whole thing is people in general are being encouraged to live life devoid of responsibility. And people like her don't pay enough lip service to that. They rather choose to contend the decisions that people like Cam Newton make without contending the decisions that people personally make in terms of how they are living. So I think that's the real issue here, but everything else can just fall by the wayside.
No, 100, man. Hey, and ladies, let me know where I went wrong down in the comment section. All right, just take it easy on me. All right, I am a guy after all.
Yeah.
I only think with one organ on my body. So excuse me if I'm wrong on that one. But nah, man, I agree with you, bro. So yeah, we'll see. The very nuanced situation, but I just didn't. I think that she should have been a little bit more open minded as a doctor.
Well, doctor can mean a lot of things these days.
Dr. Dre.
Yeah. Shouts out to Cam, bro. His podcast is doing numbers. So yeah, he can't afford to pay for whatever it is he got to pay for. That's for sure.
Yeah, and shout out to Dr. Bryant. If you come across this video, hell, we'll interview you. You know what I'm saying? What's going on?